3 days before her wedding, Lady Rosalind Percival walked to the cliffs to die. The October wind tore at her cloak, flung salt against her face, and seemed almost to push her back from the edge, as if even the sea, that hungry gray thing below, had reservations about taking her. She had none. Behind her stood Beaumont Hall, 400 rooms of cold stone, and her father's failure. Before her, 60 feet down, the channel boiled white against the rocks. And in 3 days, in the chapel her grandfather had built for her grandmother, she would marry Lord Cassius Frederick, a man of 48, twice widowed, who had pressed his thumb against her wrist last week and said, smiling, "I shall enjoy breaking you, my dear." She took a step. "Don't." The voice was low, carried on the wind from somewhere to her left. She turned, slowly, expecting a footman, a groom, one of the army of servants her father had thrown at the wedding preparations. It was no servant. A young man stood 20 paces back along the cliff path, an easel propped before him, a brush still raised in his hand, as if he had been painting and forgotten to lower it. He was perhaps 24, dark-haired, unshaven, his coat the wrong color for the country, and his boots wrong for the cliffs. A leather satchel sat at his feet. The canvas behind him showed the very stretch of sea she had been about to enter. "Don't," he said again, and lowered the brush. His voice had Ireland in it, soft as smoke. "Whatever it is, don't. You know nothing of it." "I know what a person looks like at the edge of a cliff," he said. "I've seen it before." She let out a sound that was almost a laugh. "And what did you do then?" "I was too far away. I painted her, falling. I haven't painted anything else worth looking at since." He set the brush down across the rim of his palette, very carefully, the way a man sets down a loaded pistol. "Step back, please." 1 step. The wind came up under her cloak. She thought of Frederick's thumb on her wrist. She thought of her mother, dead these 8 years, who had begged her father on her last night to marry their daughter for love. She thought of how cold the water would be. She had swum in it as a child and remembered. She stepped back. The young man let out a breath she had not realized he was holding. "Who are you?" she said. "Robert Sterling. I'm the painter your father has hired to make a bridal portrait of his daughter." He looked at her properly then, and she saw the moment he understood. "Oh," he said. "Oh, no. Yes. My lady, I..." "Don't," she said. "Don't be sorry. Don't be polite. Don't bow." The wind whipped her hair across her mouth, and she pulled it free. "Just paint me something. Paint me anything. Show me one thing today that isn't about my wedding." He looked at her a long moment. Then he turned the easel toward her. The painting was the cliff and the sea, but not as she had ever seen them. He had painted them in the moment, before a storm cloud's boiling green-gray, light slanting through, a single white gull cutting across the spray. The water was alive. It was the first thing she had wanted to look at in a year. "There," he said. "That's today." Lady Rosalind Percival, who had walked to the cliffs to die, sat down on the wet grass instead and wept. Her father, the Earl of Percival, was a gambler. Beaumont Hall was mortgaged to its rafters. The silver had been sold. The tenants had not been paid in 2 seasons. Frederick had bought the lot of it, and Rosalind with it. The bridal portrait was Frederick's idea. He wanted her hung in the gallery at his estate at Hartwell, alongside the other 2 wives, both dead in childbed, both painted before they knew what waited for them. He had hired the cheapest competent painter in London, which was how Robert Sterling, son of a Dublin cooper, came to be eating the Earl's bread for a fortnight, while he made Lady Rosalind into oil and varnish. The first sitting was held in the long gallery. Rose wore the dress her mother had been married in, retrimmed for her cream silk gone the color of old ivory, sashed in pale blue. Her aunt sat in the corner with her embroidery and her ear trumpet and her sleeping spaniel, an inadequate chaperone for any purpose except the appearance of one. Robert set up his easel 10 feet from her. He did not bow. He did not call her my lady. "Tilt your chin a little to the left," he said. "Toward the window. Yes. Now, don't move. She held still. He painted. The clock ticked. The ant snored. You haven't asked, she said, after a long while. Asked what? Why? His brush did not pause. It isn't my business why. You stopped me. That makes it your business. He worked another minute in silence. Then, why, then? She told him. She told him about her father's debts and Frederick's offer and the contract already signed. She told him about her mother, who had married for love and been happy for 11 years before the fever took her. She told him she had not wept once at the engagement ball, and that this had frightened her more than anything else, because it meant some part of her had already gone to the cliff, and she was only walking to fetch it. Robert painted while she spoke. He did not look up. When she was finished, he said, Tilt your chin again. You moved. She almost laughed. I am not in the habit of telling strangers anything, she said. You haven't, he said. You've told a man who saw you at the edge of a cliff. That isn't a stranger anymore. That's something else. The brush moved. The clock ticked. The ant snored. And Lady Rosalind Percival, for the first time in 11 months, felt the small, dangerous warmth of being known. By the fourth sitting, they had stopped pretending the painting was the point of the painting. Robert would arrive at 10 and work until noon. Then he would say casually, I need to fetch my second box of pigments. I left it at the inn. And Rose would say, casually, I should walk in the orchard before luncheon. Aunt Margaret, will you come? And Aunt Margaret, who hated the autumn damp, would say, Of course not, dear. Do take care, and go back to her embroidery and her gin. The orchard ran down to a stone wall. Beyond the stone wall ran a lane. At the bottom of the lane stood a half-ruined gamekeeper's cottage, abandoned since her grandfather's day, which Robert had found on his second morning at Beaumont, while looking for a view he liked. He had cleaned a corner of it. He had brought a cracked teapot, a tin of biscuits, 2 cups. He had wedged a board across 2 stones for a table. It was the most beautiful room Rose had ever entered. There, for an hour each day, they were not Lady Rosalind and the painter. They were Rose and Robert. He told her about Dublin, about a mother who had taught him his letters from the back of a flour sack, about a brother lost at Trafalgar, about the sea voyage to Liverpool with 2 shillings sewn into his shirt. He told her he had wanted to be a painter from the age of 7, when a traveling priest had shown him a print of a Caravaggio, and he had not been able to sleep for weeks afterward. She told him about her mother's piano, sold last year. She told him about a horse she had loved, called Saracen, sold this year. She told him she had read every novel in the lending library at Tunbridge twice, and she did not believe any of them. What do you believe? He said. That nothing happens to people like me, she said. That we are decoration. That we are sold and hung. That if I cried at my wedding, the gossip columns would say I was overcome with happiness. He was quiet a moment. Then he reached across the board and the teapot and took her hand. He turned it over in his own paint-stained, calloused at the fingertips, and looked at her palm as if it were a map. Rose, he said, things happen to you. Look, you're here. She did not pull her hand away. The next afternoon, a storm came in off the channel, the kind of October storm that turned the orchard into a thrashing dark mass and rattled the cottage shutters on their nails. They were trapped there. The thunder cracked overhead, and Rose, who had been raised to find storms either frightening or romantic and had never been allowed to find them merely interesting, sat on the cottage floor with her shoes off and her stockinged feet near the fire and laughed. What? Robert said. I have not laughed in this house in a year, she said. I have not laughed outside this house in a year. I am sitting on a flagstone floor in a wet stocking, and I cannot stop. Then don't stop, he said. She didn't. He sat across from her, his back against the wall, his long legs stretched out, and he watched her laugh, until the laughter turned over into something else, into a kind of quiet weeping that was not unhappy, only very tired. The kind of weeping that comes when a person has been carrying a thing for a long time and has just been permitted to put it down. He did not move to comfort her. He did not say, "There, there." He sat where he was, and he let her have the room. When she was finished, she said, "I am sorry." "For what?" "I do not know." "Then don't be." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. The fire snapped. The rain came harder. "Tell me a thing," she said. "Tell me a thing about yourself I would not guess." He thought. "I cannot swim," he said. "You? You crossed the Irish Sea." "Hating every minute of it. I cannot swim a stroke. I went all the way to Liverpool, clutching the rail, because I had heard that drowning men loose their grip, and I was determined to keep mine. And now you live by the sea." "I live by it because it is the only thing larger than what I am afraid of," he said. She looked at him. "Tell me one," he said. "I cannot ride properly. I can sit on a horse. I cannot ride. I was supposed to be taught by my father's master of horse, and he taught me 3 lessons and was sent away because my father owed him too much money. That is not a deep secret, Rose. It is when you grew up at Beaumont." He laughed, really laughed, not at her, but with her, the way she had not been laughed with in years. Then he said, more quietly, "Tell me a real one." She did not have to think. "I have never been kissed," she said. "Not once. Not by a cousin at a ball. Not by a stable boy when I was 16. Not by my own intended husband. I am 22 years old, and no one has ever wanted to kiss me, only to acquire me, which is the opposite. And I have been thinking, since the cliff, that I would like, before the end of my life, to know what one feels like, so that when I die, I will at least know." He looked at her a long moment, across the cottage floor. Then he came across to her on his hands and knees, slowly, asking permission with every inch, and he kissed her, once, very softly, on the inside of the wrist, where Frederick had pressed his thumb. And then, when she did not pull her wrist away, he kissed her on the mouth. The rain came down outside. The fire muttered. She did not pull away that day, and she did not pull away the next, when he kissed her again in the doorway of the cottage, with her hair wet against his face. 6 days remained until the wedding. On the 7th day from the end, Robert said, "I want to draw you. You are drawing me every morning. Not Lady Rosalind in cream silk, you, as you are." She understood what he meant. The cottage had a window looking onto an apple tree gone wild. The afternoon light came through it, gold and slow. She thought she would be afraid. She was not. She undid the laces of her gown herself, because there was no maid, and because she wanted to. The silk slipped to the floor with a sound like a sigh. She kept her shift and her stockings, and the pearl her mother had left her at her throat, the only piece of jewelry Frederick had not yet inventoried, and she sat in the chair Robert had pulled into the light, and she looked at him. He did not touch her. He sat opposite, 6 feet away, and he picked up a piece of charcoal, and he looked at her, the way he had looked at the sea before the storm. "Don't move," he said, and his voice was not steady. She did not move. He drew her for an hour. He drew her shoulder, the line of her collarbone, the dark fall of her hair, against the pale shift, the pearl. He drew her hands in her lap, the left one open, the right one half closed. He drew her mouth. When he was finished, he turned the page and showed her. It was not a portrait. It was a confession. It was the way he saw her, fierce and tired and clever and beautiful and alive, none of which had ever appeared in any picture made of her in her life. "Keep it," he said. "Hide it. Take it with you to Hartwell." "No," she said. "Rose." "No," she said. "I am not going to Hartwell." He set the charcoal down. "Take me with you," she said. "When you go, on Friday, take me with you. You don't know what you're asking." "I do." "You'd be ruined." "I am ruined. I was ruined the day my father signed the contract. If I am to be ruined, let it be for something I chose. I have nothing. I have a room over a chandler's shop in Cheapside. I have £11. I have N.I. You have me, she said. If you'll have me, that is all I am asking. He did not speak. He came across the cottage, and he knelt by her chair, and he put his forehead against her knee, and he wept, once, dryly, like a man who had not done it in years. Yes, he said. Yes, God help us. Yes. Frederick arrived 2 days early. He came in the afternoon, in a black traveling carriage, with the Hartwell arms picked out in gilt. Rose saw it from the window of her dressing room and felt a cold thing turn over in her stomach. He had said he would arrive Thursday. It was Tuesday. She went down. He was in the drawing room with her father, drinking her father's claret. He stood when she entered, and bowed and kissed her hand, and his thumb pressed, briefly, against her wrist. "My dear," he said, "I could not wait. Lord Frederick. Cassius, we are nearly married. Cassius. And how does my portrait progress? Well, I believe. I should like to see it. I should like to meet the man." Her father, 3 glasses in and sweating, said, "Capital idea. Sterling, that's his name. At the Boar's Head. We'll send for him." "No need," said Frederick. "I shall walk. The afternoon is fine. I require an introduction to my wife's portraitist." He did not walk to the inn. He walked to the orchard. Later Rose understood he had been told something. A footman, a maid, the half-deaf aunt, anyone. A great house has no secrets. It only has the illusion of them, sustained by people too well paid to speak until they are better paid to do so. Frederick had been at Beaumont 4 hours, and someone had told him. He found the cottage at 3:30. Robert was inside, packing the sketch into a leather portfolio. He had been about to walk to the inn to make the arrangements a coach to London on Friday at dawn, 2 seats, paid in advance with the last of his money. Frederick did not knock. He pushed the door open with the silver head of his cane. "Mr. Sterling, I presume." Robert rose. He set the portfolio down behind him, slowly. "My lord, I came to see my wife's portrait." Imagine my surprise to find the painter at large in the woods. I was. Yes, I see what you were. Frederick crossed the room. He picked up the portfolio. He opened it. He looked at the sketch a long time. Then, very calmly, he tore it in half, and then in quarters. And then he dropped the pieces on the cottage floor and ground them under his heel. "You will leave Beaumont within the hour," he said. "You will not return to London. I will know if you do, and I have friends at the Royal Academy who will see to it that you never lift a brush in this country again. You will go to Liverpool, or to Dublin, or to hell. And you will take with you the understanding that if I ever hear that you have communicated with my wife in any form, by any means, I will see you destroyed, not killed, destroyed. Do you understand me, my lord?" Frederick's cane came up and struck Robert across the face. Robert went down on one knee. Blood started at his temple. "Do you understand me?" "I understand you." "Good." Frederick turned and walked out, and he did not look back, and the cottage door swung gently in the autumn wind. Robert knelt in the wreckage of the sketch, blood in his eye, and began to gather the pieces. Rose did not know. She knew only that the afternoon had grown long, that her father and Frederick had returned from their walk in altered moods, her father pale, Frederick pleasant, that supper was strained, that she was sent early to bed. She lay awake. At midnight, a maid she did not know slipped into her room, said nothing, pressed a folded paper into her hand, and was gone before Rose could speak. The paper was stained at one corner with something brown. It was Robert's hand. She knew it from the labels on his pigment tins. "Rose, he came. He knows. He has sent me away. I leave at first light, from the Boar's Head, on the mail coach to Bristol. From there, a packet to Cork. I cannot stay. He will ruin me, which is nothing, but he will ruin you, which is everything. Listen to me. Listen. I am not asking you to come. I am asking only that you do not go to Frederick, not on Friday, not ever. Whatever you must do, flee to a cousin, take the veil, walk to London on your own 2 feet. Do not let that man have you. Promise me. If, when you have done that, you should find yourself in Cork, there is a coffee house on Patrick Street called Mahoney's. I will leave word there every Tuesday for a year of where I can be found. I have nothing to give you but a year of Tuesdays. I am yours. I have been yours since the cliff. I will be yours until I am nothing. Rose read it 3 times. Then she got out of bed, in the dark, and she dressed. She did not dress for traveling. She dressed for the wedding. It was the only plan she had time to make. She did not sleep. She sat in her wedding dress fitted, pinned, the veil pooling on the floor in the chair by her dressing room window, and she watched the road below until the sky turned gray, and then pink, and then the color of weak tea. At 7, the road below filled with carriages. Frederick had brought guests. They were arriving from the inn at Tunbridge. At 8, her maid came to do her hair. The girl's hands were shaking. She had been told something. Everyone had been told something. At 9, Aunt Margaret came in weeping and kissed Rose on the forehead and said how proud her mother would have been. Rose said nothing. At 10, her father came. He was sober for the first time in a month. His coat was new. Frederick had paid for it. His eyes were red. Rosalind. Father. He sat down on the chaise opposite her. He looked very old. I want to say to you, he began, and stopped. He started again. I want to say to you that I know what I have done. I want to say to you that I am sorry. I want to say, he covered his face. I want to say that there is still time. If you would have me sell the hall, if you would have me go to debtor's prison, if you would have me. It is too late, she said, not unkindly. It is not too late. It is. He looked at her, and she, Rose, who had walked to the cliff 3 weeks ago to die, looked back at him with her mother's eyes, and she said, very quietly, Father, listen to me. I am going to walk down the aisle in 20 minutes. I am going to stand before the priest. And when he asks me whether I take Cassius Frederick to be my husband, I am going to say no, loudly, in front of every person in that chapel. And then I am going to walk out of the front door of Beaumont Hall, and I am going to keep walking, and I am not going to come back. He stared at her. He will ruin us, he whispered. He will ruin you, she said. I am already ruined. I am going to find out what one does after. He began to cry. She let him. Then, because she was her mother's daughter, she stood up and kissed his forehead and gave him her handkerchief. Get me a horse, she said. After. Not from our stable. From the village. Have it ready at the lane gate by noon. Will you do that, Colleen? N. He nodded. He could not speak. Then go down, she said. Go down and stand in your place. I will be there in a moment. She walked down the aisle on no one's arm. Her father was there, in his pew, weeping silently. Frederick stood at the altar in dove gray and gold, smiling the smile of a man who had just been told the price he had paid was even better than he had thought. The chapel was full. 300 people, candles, the smell of beeswax and damp stone, and her mother's roses. She walked. The aisle was 40 feet long. It felt like 4 miles. Her dress was very heavy. She reached the altar. The priest began. She listened to him with great calmness. She listened to the words about love and duty and the sanctity of marriage. She thought about Robert, on a coach somewhere south of here, his head bandaged, his portfolio lighter by one drawing. She thought about the cliff and how cold the water had looked. The priest said, Cassius George Edmund Frederick, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife? He said, I will. The priest said, Rosalind Mary Percival, wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband? She let him finish. She let him get to the end. She let the chapel hold its breath. And then she said, clearly, into the silence of 300 staring strangers and her weeping father and a man holding her wrist, "I will not." The chapel exploded. She did not stay to watch it. She turned, picked up the front of her wedding dress in both hands, and walked back down the aisle with her chin up and her veil dragging behind her like a pennant, and she pushed open the chapel doors into the October sun. There was a horse at the lane gate, a gray gelding, saddled, a man at its head, a stranger, paid, who did not meet her eye. There was a small portmanteau strapped behind the saddle. Her father had done what she had asked. She did not know how to ride in a wedding dress. She found out. She tore the skirt at the side seam to free her legs. She stuffed the veil into the portmanteau. She mounted the gray from the gatepost. Behind her, voices were rising at the chapel. Someone was shouting her name. She did not look back. She rode south. She rode through that day and into the dusk, and she slept in a barn outside Tonbridge with the gray tide beside her, and she rode on at dawn. On the second day, she made a mistake. She stopped at an inn for hot food because she had not eaten in 30 hours, and her hands were beginning to shake on the reins. She kept her cloak up and the hood drawn forward, and she sat in the corner of the taproom with her back to the door, and she ordered bread and stew from a girl who scarcely looked at her. And for 10 minutes she allowed herself to believe she was invisible. Then a man's voice from the bar said, "There was a runaway bride at Beaumont yesterday, did you hear?" A second voice said, I heard. Frederick's woman said, "I will not," in the chapel, and rode off in her wedding clothes. They've a man on the London road and a man on the Brighton road, and Frederick himself is offering £20 to whoever brings her back. A young woman, alone, in a wedding dress. Aye. The first voice was nearer than the second. The first voice belonged to a man at the bar with his back turned, but his back was turned toward a cracked mirror behind the bar, and Rose could see his face in it, and she watched his face register slowly, the way a slow thought arrives, that a young woman in a cloak was sitting alone in the corner of his taproom with her hood up and her hands shaking around a piece of bread. She set the bread down. She stood up. She did not run. She walked, with her chin up, the way she had walked down the aisle at Beaumont, and she walked past the bar and past the man and out of the taproom and around to the yard where the gray was tied. And she mounted from the mounting block, and she put the gelding into a trot before she had even gathered her reins, and she heard the taproom door bang open behind her, and a voice shout, "Madam!" And she put her heels into the gray's flanks, and she did not look back. She rode the gray hard for an hour. When she finally let him drop to a walk, his neck was lathered, and her own thighs were trembling from grip. She left the high road at the next crossroads and took a farm lane she had no map for. She lost herself in it. She got lost properly, in fact, for half a day, and slept that night in a hedgerow with the gray's reins wrapped around her wrist because she did not dare another inn. She reached Bristol on the 5th day, not the 4th. She had £38, every coin and trinket of value she had been able to gather between midnight and dawn, including her mother's pearl. She paid for a cabin on the next packet to Cork. She wore a borrowed cloak over what was left of her wedding dress. She gave a false name. The clerk did not ask questions. Her face had asked him not to. The crossing was rough. She was sick for 2 days. On the 3rd day, the weather cleared, and she went up on deck, and she watched the green coast of Ireland rise out of the morning sea, and she thought, "I am a person to whom things happen." She landed in Cork on a Tuesday. She found Mahoney's Coffee House on Patrick Street that afternoon. He was not there. The man behind the counter, a stout fellow with an apron and white whiskers, looked at her cropped wedding dress, her cracked boots, her face, and said, in the soft accent she had come to love, "And who'll I say is asking?" She had not thought about this. She had not planned past the door. "Tell him," she began, and her voice cracked. "Tell him, Rose." The man's eyes changed. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down, missus. Sit down there by the fire. He told me he'd be in here every Tuesday at 4 for as long as it took, and he has not missed one yet. He'll be in directly. It is, he glanced at the clock, 20 minutes to 4. She sat by the fire. She could not feel her hands. The man brought her coffee with whiskey in it, and a piece of bread, and said no charge, and went away. The clock above the bar ticked. The fire muttered. The door opened twice, and was not him, and twice she nearly fainted. At 4 exactly, the door opened a third time. He came in out of the rain. He had a bandage still at his temple. He was thinner. His coat was wet. He had a portfolio under his arm, the same leather portfolio, and inside it she would later see the carefully reassembled pieces of the sketch, glued onto a backing sheet so the lines all met again. He saw the man behind the counter. The man behind the counter pointed very slightly with his chin at the fire. Robert turned. She stood up. He did not move. He did not move for a long moment. The portfolio slipped out from under his arm and landed on the floor with a soft sound, and he did not pick it up. Then he crossed the room in 4 strides, and he took her face in his hands, paint-stained, calloused at the fingertips, and he said, "You came." "I came. Rose, I am not Lady Rosalind anymore," she said. "I am no one's. I am yours, if you'll have me. That is all I am asking." He laughed, once, and it broke in the middle, and he pulled her against his chest, and he held her there in the doorway of Mahoney's Coffee House on Patrick Street, while the rain came down outside, and the kettle hissed, and an old man in the corner pretended very hard to read a newspaper he was holding upside down. This is not a story with a tragedy in it. The tragedy has already happened to her father, who lost Beaumont within the year, to Frederick, who took a third wife in 1815 and was poisoned by her 3 years after, which is another story, to England, which kept on being England. This is what happened to Rose and Robert. They were married in a registry office in Cork in November of 1813, under the names Robert Sterling and Rose Percival. No titles, no veils, 2 witnesses fetched in from the street. They had £11, a horse sold for 16, a portfolio of drawings, and a pearl. They moved to Dublin. Robert painted. He was not famous. He was good, better, in fact, than his clients deserved, and he made a steady living doing portraits of lawyers' wives and merchants' children, and once a bishop. Rose taught English and French to the daughters of Dublin gentry. They lived in 3 rooms over a chandler's shop in a part of Dublin that was, as it happened, prettier than the Cheapside Robert had once warned her about. They had 4 children. The eldest, a daughter, they named Mary, after Rose's mother. The second, a son, they named Tom, after Robert's lost brother. The third and fourth were twins, Cassius and Cassia, named in a fit of black humor the autumn after Frederick died, and called Cass and Cassie all their lives, and never told why. They were not always happy. They were poor for the first 8 years, and frightened for 2 of them. Robert got a fever in 1819 that nearly took him. Rose miscarried twice. They argued, sometimes terribly, the way 2 people do who have given up everything for each other and must therefore daily justify the price. But they were free. And they had chosen. There is a story their daughter Mary used to tell, in her old age, that her grandchildren did not always believe. She said that when she was a girl of 8 or 9, she had crept down one summer evening and found her mother and father in the small parlor of the Dublin house, alone, the children all asleep and the supper cleared. Her mother was at the window with her hair down. Mary had never seen her mother with her hair down, and for a moment did not recognize her. And her father was sitting in his chair across the room, with a piece of charcoal in his hand and a sheet of paper on his knee, drawing her. Neither of them was speaking. Her father was drawing. Her mother was looking out at the Dublin rain. Mary said it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and that she had not understood, at 8, why it had stopped her at the door, why she had stood there in her nightdress for what felt like a very long time and had not gone in. Only when she was much older, she said, did she understand. She had been looking at two people who had given up countries for each other, and were still, after everything, finding each other worth drawing on an ordinary Tuesday evening in the rain. Rose lived to be 71. Robert lived to be 68. He died first, in the spring of 1857, in a house in Rathmines they had at last been able to buy, with the cottage sketch, glued and faded and beloved, hanging over their bed. It hangs there still, in a private collection in Dublin, unattributed, catalogued only as Young Woman by a Window, c. 1813. English School. The cataloger was wrong about the school. He was right about everything else.